Why do so many consultants and other service business providers, if you will, are struggling with selling their services and selling themselves? It's way easier to sell a product. It's way easier to sell someone else's service than it is to sell ours. That's an interesting phenomenon, and there's a reason why this is happening. I'll unpack it in just a second. But more importantly, what is happening is that a lot of consultants and fractional consultants they position themselves in the wrong way. It's all about how we present ourselves to the market, and I call it a wake up problem. So most consultants are positioning themselves as presenting themselves to the market as someone who's delivering a certain type of work in a certain type of way, right? So for example, I do marketing strategy and I have these packages, right? And that is not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is through that wake up problem, because nobody actually wakes up 3 a.m. or in the morning after a good night's sleep and think, oh, I need a strategic advice around marketing. What they wake up with, what is keeping them up at night, is a thought about how they're not getting leads, how about they're not getting sales, how about their team is not efficient, not operating well, how they do not have the right team, how they need to hire someone, how they are losing money and they don't know why, right? So they look at it from a perspective of actually what actually hurts their business, not from a perspective of a solution that you're providing them in that sense of strategic marketing or strategic advice or hiring help or whatever else you're offering. So you always have to think about what is it that wakes them up in the morning? What is it that keeps them up at night until 2 or 3 a.m.? And once you realize the kind of neck bleeding wake up problem, then this is how you need to position yourself as someone who can actually solve that problem for them, right? Because remember, every business exists to solve a problem. Every single business. Airbnb solves a problem of staying overnight somewhere nice, right? Hotels, the same stuff. Restaurants solve a problem of eating, but also socializing, right? Uber solves a problem of transportation and commuting. Um, every single business exists to solve a problem, and you need to solve the problem for a client as well. Now, you need to position yourself as someone who is actually solving that problem. And that problem is the wake up problem, right? You cannot position yourself as someone who's from a delivery perspective. You cannot present a package. You cannot present a program or a set of tools, because nobody cares. I don't care how my accountant is fixing my books. I don't care. Like, he can use QuickBooks, he can use Zero, he can use a calculator, a Google Sheet, whatever. What I need is taxes done on time, right? And optimize in a way that I'm paying, at the least amount of taxes. That's what I care. That's what I would think, maybe, at the end of the financial year, I would go, oh, I need to get my taxes, in order. And I don't really care about the tool. I don't care about how they do it, how long it takes them. I mean, I do, as long as they do it on time, we're fine, right? And so you need to think about it that way. Like, every business exists to solve a problem. What is the problem that my client has, my potential client, my prospects, my audience has? What is it that keeps them up at night, right? And the reason why we look at it from that perspective of what keeps them up at night, because we want to present ourselves as someone who's fixing a very painful problem. The more painful the problem is, the easier the sell on your end, right? Because it's easier, there's this saying that it's easier to sell an aspirin or a painkiller than it is to sell a vitamin, right? People do not necessarily buy supplements or vitamins, because it's kind of something for the future. It's like buying insurance. It might or might not happen, right? But if you're in pain, you want the painkiller right now. And so it's way easier to convince someone to buy your painkiller than it is to buy your vitamin, or like, hey, you need to stay hydrated, right? Yeah, nobody kind of pays attention to it until you are dehydrated and until you see the results or the effects of it. And at that point, you'll buy everything to fix the dehydration status, right? So that's why we start with understanding that every business exists to solve the problem, and then what kind of problem are we solving. The more painful, the more direct, the more immediate problem we're dealing with, the easier it will be for you to sell it at a premium price, and also the easier it will be to sell it and deliver in a short amount of time, because that which is good for you, because you can have more clients at the same, with the same kind of time that you have on hands, and without the client complaining about why is this so expensive and why you're charging $2,000 just for 2 hours of work. If the problem is really painful, they will pay any amount of money just to have it fixed as soon as possible, right? So when you start looking at it from that perspective, you start positioning yourself in a proper way. You start positioning yourself as someone who is fixing that very painful problem, and you will stop putting stuff like strategic marketing, or strategic advice, 360 support on your website, on your LinkedIn profile, because that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't even know what that means, right? And how do I apply this to my situation as a potential client? I don't even know, right? It would require a very high understanding and awareness of like what it means as strategic advice in this space. Or maybe if you are referred to that prospect, then that's a different story, because that prospect has already been given a a background or context. You were sold to your prospect by the person that referred you, you know in a certain context with certain parameters. So the lead coming in, they're already warm. We say, they're warm, right, or hot. They understand the context, they understand how you can help them, right? So your website, your LinkedIn profile, you did not have to pull all the weight, because all that weight was carried by the person who referred you to that lead, right? But that's not sustainable. That's not something you can control. And referrals, it's a different topic, but you cannot really control referrals. And most of us consultants, we don't really actually have a proper referral program. I have a video on how to create a referral program if you are interested. And so that's why whenever we go after a cold audience, we have to think about what is think about, again, putting the lens, the filter of every business exists to solve a problem. How do we position ourselves as someone who can fix that problem? What is the wake up problem? What is the neck bleeding kind of problem that I can solve? And then from there, once you are positioned properly, you have to go and create an offer around it, right? That's attractive. What is the painkiller? How do we apply that painkiller? How long it's gonna take for the painkiller to work? What's the price point of it, and all that stuff, right? So that's how we have to look at it. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that it's easier to sell someone else's product or service than it is to sell our own, because it's kind of uncomfortable to sell our own thing. And very often we have when you are the face of the business, you're the founder, you're the fractional CMO or CFO or fractional consultant, you are the business, you are the face of the business. And so you have that emotional connection to what you deliver, and you can see a tiniest flaw in what you do and how you deliver, right? And very often we start questioning ourselves of like, oh, am I actually doing am I putting enough work into this? Am I doing a good job? Maybe I can improve whatever I'm doing, right? All these things, especially if you're perfectionist, you will have all these thoughts about like, oh, this is not good enough yet. Even though for most of us, 75% of what we do, level of perfectionism and goodness of of what we deliver, 75% is very often at a level of 150% of other people on the market, and definitely already useful for the client. And so we over analyze, we try to make it perfect. And this is where kind of that mindset creeps in, where we start questioning and maybe lose the confidence in our own abilities, in our own product, right? Or product as a service, or service as a product. And so And so that's why when a friend asks you, hey, can you sell this service that I have, and it's amazing, we have these amazing results, you do not question that. You trust them, you believe them, because you also don't see the tiniest cracks in that product, how it's not always as smooth as they say, it's not always delivered perfectly. There's some issues with it, there's some challenges, but it's always the case. It's never super flawless, right? And so you cannot kind of use that as a way, as something that's weighing you down in how you look at your own service and your own product, because there's always challenges. It's not always, it's not perfect. We are kind of going towards that perfection, and making, trying to make it as smooth and as perfect as possible, but obviously it's a journey, right? So we have to kind of quiet that noise, that voice that tells us, hey, there's a flaw, there's a small stain. You know how it is, like when you have a small stain on your pants or like on your shirt, and you're probably the only one who can see it. Nobody else around you have spotted that stain, but because you pay attention to it, all of a sudden, let's say you're in a video and you're like, oh my gosh, I have a stain, I have a stain, I have a stain, and that stain, the awareness and that voice of like, oh, I'm not professional, and whatever the voice is telling you, and the fact that you have that stain that only you can see, is lowering your self-esteem, is lowering is impacting your mindset in a negative way, making you question whether you're good enough, maybe making you question whether you're in the right spot. Should I be on the stage? I have a stain, right? So you need to learn how to observe that and how to judge whether that stain actually makes any difference for the output and delivery for the client. That's number one. Number two, does anyone actually even see the stain? The fact that you are supposed to, that you thought you're going to send an email or deliver something on a Monday and in night, because you had this internal need to do it because that would be professional and perfect, and you send it 12 hours later, Tuesday morning, that does not make a difference for the client, as long as you haven't agreed it's going to be sent on Monday, obviously. But if you pressure yourself too much, then you can see the stains all over, because you're just doing too much of things that really do not matter. You see the stains that your client wouldn't. Your client maybe wasn't expecting you to send something on a Monday. That was your internal, timeline. And it was completely fine to send it on a Tuesday. But because you had this internal kind of dialogue, you are starting to look at your product and your service as something that's not good enough. And that hits your mindset. And that's why it's way harder to sell it, because when your client shows up on a call and you want to charge premium for something, and you have all these voices in your head and mindset kind of challenges in that sense, you it's just hard to confidently say, hey, it's going to be X, and you are not confident on the call, and they question something. Maybe they ask you a question, and throw an objection, a typical objection, sales objection at you, and then you start cracking, and then you kind of back out and lower the price, and then you resent that situation, you resent the client, you resent the project maybe. So wrapping up, um, think about the fact that every business exists to solve a problem. Think about the fact that you have to find a wake-up problem. Think about the fact that then, you have to find a way to position yourself as someone who can fix that problem, and then create an offer that will deliver that painkiller. And also think about kind of quieting down that voice that says, hey, what I do is not good enough, because it is.